The truth is arranged in stacked plates. People at the top share information and power sparingly, and only with those willing to learn the system and play along. Even at the highest levels of education, students are programmed. You have to have more than curiosity or a desire to know it. The deciders have more than money and power. They have a collective desire to sustain the narrative with its untruths sequestered. And the cost is the forced agreement with the column of empty spaces between the plates where omissions define what governance and society hide. This is how the general notion of truth is composed. It is littered with untruths and composed of fantastic, illogical agreements authored by untrustworthy men. They seek to make an image of truth like a singular, linear thing that leads back to the past and on into the future, with the empty spaces between of their denials and lies, making it more like a columnar, circling line than anything else, a coil. I was given more access than most because of how I chose to target my intellect. I studied history and political science at school, and then the development of our information media during the past 30 years. Before the internet, their truths seemed far less universal or evident. It seemed suspect. But what has been hidden, the layers to which I am not read in, are what I fear defines our society now. The colonial era, which defines the world from the vantage of white people, is the author. Almost everything about our accepted history is a lie told to substantiate and support a system that is corrupt and favors the white European perspective. The history of the winners of the last 500 years is insane. The attempted genocide of entire nations, begun with their navigation of the seas in massive ships designed to plunder and oppress, continues, abated only slightly by their perception of having mapped the entirety of our world's territory. Yet it is substantiated as legitimate by the creation of the context within which discussion occurs. Quote, "We must move past politics now and just deal with the facts on the ground." The authoritarian fascists and right-wing elements arising throughout Europe and the USA are coldly expressing their denial of the consecutive and continuous untruths and attempt to make the entire world accept the narrative. In it, ancient peoples, and billions of them throughout Asia and Africa, are still considered barbaric hordes of heathens. There's a firm unwillingness to shatter the absurd fallacy. Worse, the engine of the world is being driven at an alarming speed to blow past truths to accept the narrative. We must stop. We must stop now. An honest reassessment of the colonial era, including a full reassessment of the validity of nations and states from Palestine to Park City, Utah, is an imperative of truth. Reparations and reconciliation cannot begin in a climate of international denial of truths for contractual agreements between corporate entities that control the most important of our planet's resources. Humanity has exceeded the capacity of nature to control us and, for at least 100 years now, at an alarming speed, become the greatest force of damage and destruction and violent rape of the natural world. We must stop. The invention of a society willing to ignore truths to support a fantasy projection of a nation-state emerged directly from the creation of information media that directly contradict the truth and program people to believe the narrative. Individual free thinkers who know better exist everywhere. Riding the information media, one can see we exist. But we are neutralized by an inability to overcome the massive noise that drowns out the truth. How can we get this whole thing to stop and look honestly at the lies? How are we to unpack the propaganda and jingo? The USA isn't anything it says it is anymore, in the same way the Soviet Union wasn't when it fell apart. Yet we are all forced to call it the greatest country in the world, obliged to praise and never criticize how it has come into being or what it engages in globally, protect the powerful corporate interests who compose the narrative. Even to say openly that the attempted genocide of the First Nations in the Americas is a far more terrible thing than the attempted genocide of the Jews by Hitler's Reich is considered wrong-minded. We are forced to accept that shit just happened to the red man, to the brown man, to the black man. They lost. Quote, we, quote, won. We won. The USA just exists. And now the same narrative approach is taken with Israel. Only it's not a 275-year-old continuous lie, it's a 100-year-old one. The single coiled line of their historical narrative cannot stand The suggestion of the truth that these nations do not and cannot legitimately exist without massive international brainwashing. Every citizen of the USA, born here or not, is responsible for this giant coiled stack of lies of omission. The only way forward is to admit it is a house of cards. The Republicans will never do this. The spook, George Herbert Walker Bush, and his powerful secret society seized control to ensure their narrative will not die. If the Democrats represented a chance for the truth after Nixon and led by Carter, Reagan covered up for Bush and his cronies to crush that. And the Clinton establishment destroyed it further through the compromises and contracts of globalism, with alliances in Israel, Mexico, Europe, and around the world. Both parties now represent the cementing of the false narrative in order for the USA to exist. They are, in fact, one party, much like the Soviet Union when it ended. We must be honest. We must stop the train of this madness and reassess the entirety of the project. We must have the courage to lead the world in self-critical assessment of our society, identification of its wrongdoings, and in reparations and reconciliation for these. We must lead other nations to this before a true globalism can exist. You have to break free. Figure out how.